Some men fight wars with guns. I fought mine with a rusted crowbar in my hands, standing in another man's house, staring at the bed where my wife had betrayed me. It smelled like cheap cologne and sweat. The sheets were tangled, a woman's jacket tossed over a chair. My gut clenched, but I kept my grip firm on the crowbar. No yelling, no swearing, no shaking hands. I was past that. A phone buzzed on the nightstand. Scarlett's. Face down, still charging. I flipped it over. Zachary Lambert. Can't wait to see you again. Beautiful. Tonight was unreal. I stared at the message for a long moment, then at the pile of clothes by the bed. Scarlett's jeans. Zachary's boots. My chest was solid rock, cold and unyielding. The proof was right in front of me, but I already knew. I'd known for weeks. I put the phone down carefully, like I was setting a glass on the counter. No dramatic smashing, no anger-fueled destruction. That was what they expected, an outburst, a scene, something they could twist into he lost his temper or he's just jealous. But I wasn't about to give them that satisfaction. The house was quiet. They were still asleep. I could hear their breathing from the bedroom. My hands curled tighter around the crowbar, the weight of it familiar. It would be easy. So damn easy. One good swing, and Zachary wouldn't be waking up. One more, and Scarlett would never lie to me again. But that wasn't the way a man like me handled things. I took one last look at the room, then turned and walked out the front door. The drive home to Cedar Creek was long and dark, the road stretching out like an old scar. I kept the windows down, letting the wind cut through the thick air. The smell of cattle and damp earth rolled in from the fields. It grounded me. My name's Jameson Chapman. I'm 52 years old, and I've worked the same land my whole life. My father built our farm with his bare hands, and I took it over when he got too sick to keep going. We raise cattle, grow feed, and sell to every small grocer from here to Waco. It's not an easy life, but it's the only one I ever wanted. The farm's in my blood, my bones. And tonight, I realized I'd been sharing it with a liar. The porch light was still on when I pulled into the driveway. Scarlett had left it that way, out of habit, maybe, or because she still thought she was fooling me. I killed the engine and sat for a moment, watching the old farmhouse. The paint was peeling in places, but the structure was strong. I'd fixed that porch myself last summer, hammering in every nail, tightening every beam. That's what a man does. He builds, he protects, he holds things together. Scarlett was inside, probably asleep, curled up like nothing was wrong. My boy, Tyler, would be in his room, exhausted from working in the fields all day. He was 17 now, tall and solid like I was at his age, already carrying the weight of responsibility on his back. I walked in, my boots heavy on the wooden floor. The house smelled like coffee and worn leather, familiar and steady. I stood in the kitchen, listening. The clock on the wall ticked slow and steady. Nothing else. I poured myself a black coffee and sat down at the table, setting the crowbar down next to my mug. The metal glinted under the dim light. I wasn't gonna shout. I wasn't gonna throw things. But Scarlett didn't know it yet. Her life was about to change. I'd make damn sure of it. The coffee was bitter, but I barely tasted it. I sat there, letting the silence settle. The house was mine. The land was mine. My name built everything under this roof. But Scarlett, she was just passing through, pretending she belonged. I stared at the crowbar, then ran a hand over my face. This wasn't about rage. It wasn't about begging for answers or hearing her excuses. This was about setting things right, about handling the situation like a man, not some desperate fool clinging to something already gone. Footsteps creaked upstairs. A door opened, soft but noticeable. Then the sound of bare feet on the stairs. Scarlett. She was moving slow, like she didn't want to be heard. She stepped into the kitchen, wearing an old t-shirt and pajama shorts, rubbing her eyes. Jameson. Her voice was thick with sleep. What are you doing up? I took another sip of coffee, didn't bother looking up. Long day. She yawned, stretching her arms. You should have come to bed. That made me smile, just barely. She had no idea. Nah, I said. Got a lot on my mind. She hesitated near the counter, glancing at the clock. It's almost 3. I finally looked at her. Her hair was messy, and there was still a hint of perfume on her skin. The same perfume I'd smelled in Zachary Lambert's house. She didn't know I knew. Not yet. I leaned back in my chair, stretching out my legs. Where were you tonight? Her eyes flickered, just for a second. Not much, but enough. Out with Alice. I nodded, slow. That's so. She grabbed a glass from the cabinet, filled it with water. Yeah. We had dinner, caught up. You know how she is, talking for hours. I watched her drink, my patience stretching thin. Funny. I saw Alice at the feed store this morning. Said she was heading out of town for the week. The glass paused halfway to her lips. A crack in the mask. Small, but there. Oh, she said, clearing her throat. Must have been last minute. I nodded again, tapping my fingers on the table. Yeah, must have been. Silence settled between us. The weight of it was thick, pressing. She swallowed, set her glass down carefully. Why are you a skin, all this? I picked up the crowbar, feeling the cold metal against my palm. Turned it over, watching the way the light hit it. No reason, I said, standing up. Long night, like I said. Her eyes flickered to the crowbar, then back to me. Just a flash of unease before she forced a smile. Well, you should get some sleep. We got a busy weekend with the cattle. I stepped closer, just enough that I could see the tightness in her shoulders, the way she was holding her breath. You're right. It's gonna be a busy weekend. She didn't move until I set the crowbar down on the counter. Then she exhaled, too quick, too relieved. She had no idea that the hardest part wasn't holding on to my anger. The hardest part was holding on to my patience. The next morning, I woke up before dawn, same as always. Scarlett was still in bed when I left, the house quiet, the air thick with that feeling of something breaking, even if she didn't know it yet. I drove into town, parked outside Turner and Company. Law offices just as the sun started to climb. Roman Turner had been my lawyer for years. Handled the land contracts, the business side of things. He was a sharp man, not the type to waste time. When I walked in, he looked up from his desk and nodded. Jameson, he said, setting down his pen. This early, I'm guessing it ain't good news. I sat down across from him, resting my elbows on the wood. I need to start separation paperwork. Roman didn't blink, just leaned back in his chair. You sure? Yeah. I exhaled slowly. I'm sure. He studied me for a second, then reached for a folder. You want a fight or a clean break? I rubbed my jaw, thinking. I want what's mine. She gets nothing extra. No claim to the farm, no stake in the land. Just what's legally owed, not a penny more. Roman nodded, already flipping through papers. You got proof? Plenty. He let out a breath, tapping the desk. All right. We'll start slow, make sure you're covered. You talked to Tyler yet? I shook my head. Not yet. Kid's got enough on his plate. Roman didn't argue. He just pulled a fresh sheet of paper from his drawer and started writing. This is gonna get messy, you know that. I smiled, but there was no humor in it. Messy for her. Not for me. By the time I got back to the farm, the sun was high, and the day was moving. Tyler was out by the fence line, checking the posts. He waved when he saw me, his hands rough and calloused from the same work I'd been doing since I was his age. I leaned against the truck, watching him for a second. He was a good boy. Hard-working, smart. Didn't complain, didn't slack. He deserved better than a mother who was out sneaking around like some lovesick teenager. When he walked up, wiping sweat from his brow, he frowned. You all right? I forced a chuckle, clapping a hand on his shoulder. Yeah, bud. Just got some things to take care of. He studied me, then nodded. All right. Just let me know what you need. I looked out at the fields, the wide stretch of land that had been in our family for 3 generations. The soil, the sweat, the work, none of it would go to waste. I wasn't about to let a woman who didn't know the meaning of loyalty take any of it from me. Scarlett had made her choice. Now I was making mine. I spent the next few days moving in silence. Didn't ask Scarlett anything, didn't change my routine. Let her think everything was normal. That was the key. Let her get comfortable. Let her believe she'd gotten away with it. I spent the mornings working the land, fixing fences, checking the cattle. Tyler and I barely spoke about anything beyond the work, but I could tell he was paying attention. He had my eyes, my patience. He saw things. He just hadn't put the pieces together yet. Scarlett, though, she moved differently. More careful. Checking her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. Dressing up when she went into town, wearing perfume when she said she was running errands. She thought she was being smart. I let her think that. One night, I stepped onto the back porch, taking a slow drink from my beer while the crickets filled the air. The farm smelled like cut grass and warm dirt, like home. Reed Lewis pulled up in his truck, dust kicking up behind him, his headlights washing over the barn before he cut the engine. He climbed out, heavy boots thudding against the gravel. Got your message, he said, closing the door. This about what I think it's about? I nodded, tipping the bottle toward him. Come on in. Inside, I set the beer down and grabbed the security footage I'd pulled from the cameras. A USB drive, nothing fancy. I tossed it onto the table between us. That what I think it is? Reed asked, picking it up. Proof, I said. Everything I need. He turned it over in his hand, then let out a low whistle. You gonna play it for her? I shook my head. Nah. She don't deserve that kind of warning. But I want it ready. When the time comes, I want this out in the open. No arguing. No lies. Reed leaned against the counter, scratching his beard. You want me to be there when it happens? I want half the damn town to be there when it happens. He smirked. Now that's more like it. The plan wasn't just about exposing her. It was about making sure there was no crawling back. No second chances. I wasn't interested in half measures. Scarlett had burned this house down, whether she knew it yet or not. I was just making sure everyone saw the flames. I spent the next few days making arrangements. Made sure the bills were squared away, moved money into a separate account, had Roman finalize the paperwork. Scarlett had no idea that while she was sneaking off, I was cutting every financial tie she thought she had to me. Then I made one last call to Alice. She answered after a few rings, her voice cautious. Jameson? Yeah. Listen, I need a favor. She sighed. If this is about Scarlett. It is. A pause. Then, what do you need? Your guest list from your birthday party last year. Everyone she knows. Everyone she talks to. She hesitated, then exhaled. You're really gonna do this? I leaned against the truck, watching the sun dip behind the trees. Damn right, I am. By the end of the week, everything was set. The Harvest Festival was a big deal in Cedar Creek, the kind of thing that brought the whole town together. Families, old friends, neighbors, it was the perfect place for something like this. Everyone would be there. I didn't say a word to Scarlett. Didn't mention the festival, didn't ask if she was coming. I wanted her to feel safe, to think everything was normal. Let her step right into the trap without even realizing it. The night before, I sat on the porch with Tyler, the cool air settling in around us. He was sharpening a knife, slow and steady, like he'd seen me do 1,000 times before. Something's going on, he said finally, not looking up. I took a slow breath. Yeah, you gonna tell me? I glanced at him, then back at the fields. Not yet. He nodded once, kept sharpening the blade. Okay. That was the thing about Tyler. He didn't push. He trusted me. And when the time came, he'd understand. The Harvest Festival was the biggest event in Cedar Creek, a tradition stretching back longer than I'd been alive. Folks brought homemade pies, grilled steaks over open flames, set up booths selling everything from hand-carved furniture to honey straight from the comb. It was a place for business, for community, for celebrating another year of hard work. For me, it was the perfect place to put an end to my marriage in front of the people who mattered. Scarlett got dressed like nothing was wrong, like she had a normal day ahead of her. Hair done up, makeup just right, wearing that green blouse she knew I used to like. I watched her from the porch as she checked herself in the mirror by the door. You coming to the festival? She asked, casual. I'll be there. She smiled, slipping on her boots. Good. Maybe we can actually enjoy something together for once. I let that sit in the air for a second before nodding. Maybe. She left first, said she was heading into town early to meet up with some of the other wives. I watched her truck disappear down the road, then went back inside to grab what I needed. The USB drive sat in my pocket, a weight I'd been carrying for too long. By the time I made it to the festival, the whole town was buzzing. The smell of smoked brisket and fresh bread filled the air, kids ran between booths, and the men stood in circles talking cattle prices and weather patterns like their lives depended on it. Reed was already waiting by the pavilion, leaning against a post with a toothpick in his mouth. All set. Yeah. He nodded toward the center of the crowd. She's over by the judge's table, laughing it up like she's got nothing to worry about. I followed his gaze and found her standing next to Alice, sipping on a lemonade, smiling like she hadn't spent the past few months sneaking around with another man. Zachary wasn't here yet, but I wasn't worried. He'd show. The festival's main event was the Harvest Showcase, local farmers presenting their best crops, their strongest livestock, their finest work. Everyone gathered for it. That's when I made my move. I stepped onto the stage while the judges were tallying scores, grabbed the microphone. The crowd quieted, waiting. I cleared my throat. Evening, folks. I won't take up too much of your time. Just got something important to share with y'all. Scarlett turned toward me, curiosity flickering across her face. Zachary had just arrived, standing near the back, wearing that same cocky grin I'd seen the night I found his boots beside my wife's jeans. I pulled the USB drive from my pocket, held it up between my fingers. Some of y'all might know my wife, Scarlett. She's been busy this year. Real busy. I turned to the men running the sound booth. Mind playing what's on this? There was a hesitation, then a nod. The screen behind me flickered to life. First, a set of text messages. Scarlett, can't wait to see you tonight. Wish I didn't have to sneak around. Zachary, just leave him. He's too slow to even notice. Scarlett, it's not that easy. The farm, Tyler. Zachary, excuses, baby. You and me, we were always meant to be. Then came the footage, grainy, black and white security camera clips from the house. Scarlett sneaking in late. Zachary pulling into the driveway. Them on the porch, too close. A kiss. A laugh. The kind of thing that might have hurt if I hadn't already burned through every bit of hurt I had. The crowd was dead silent. Someone muttered a curse under their breath. A few gasps, a shuffle of movement as people exchanged looks. Scarlett's face drained of color. Jameson, she breathed, stepping forward. I held up a hand. Don't. Just don't. Zachary, the idiot, actually smirked. Guess the old man finally caught up. I took 2 slow steps toward him, letting the silence stretch. He was taller than me by a couple inches, younger by a few years, but he didn't have what I had. He didn't have the patience to wait, to plan, to control. You think this is funny? I asked, voice steady. His smirk faltered just a little. I mean, man, she came to me. That was as far as he got before my fist connected with his gut, knocking the wind clean out of him. He doubled over, gasping. I didn't hit him again. I didn't have to. One was enough to remind everyone watching that a man only takes so much before he reminds the world what he's made of. I stepped back, shaking out my hand, looking him dead in the eyes. You're not worth a second swing. Scarlett was crying now, real tears, hands trembling. Jameson, please, we can talk about this. I turned my back on her, let the town see exactly how little I cared. Already done talking. The festival didn't end right there, but the energy shifted. People avoided Scarlett, whispered when she passed. Zachary slipped out before things got worse for him. And me? I stayed. Ate a plate of brisket, talked shop with the men, let the weight roll off my shoulders. I'd done what needed to be done. By the time I got home, the house was dark. Scarlett's things were still there, but they wouldn't be for long. I poured myself a drink, sat on the porch, and watched the stars. The land stretched out before me, unchanged, unbothered. Just like me. The next morning, I woke up early, same as always. The sun was barely creeping over the fields when I stepped outside. The air still cool, thick with the smell of damp earth and cattle. I rolled my shoulders, flexed my fingers. My knuckles were stiff from the punch, but it was a good kind of ache. The kind that reminded me a man had to stand his ground when it counted. Scarlett's car was gone. I wasn't surprised. She hadn't come home after the festival, and I figured she wouldn't. She wasn't the type to face things head-on. She'd run first, try to spin things later. I let out a slow breath, shaking my head. That was her problem now, not mine. I found Tyler in the barn, already working. He was spreading fresh hay, his shoulders squared, his movements tight, controlled. He didn't look up when I stepped inside, but I knew he'd been thinking about what happened. You hear from her? He asked, voice flat. I leaned against the stall, crossing my arms. Nope. He kept working, his jaw tight. She texted me. Said she wants to explain. I watched him for a moment, taking in the way he kept his hands busy, the way he wasn't looking at me. You want to hear her out? He stopped, leaning on the pitchfork, staring down at the straw like it had answers. No, he said finally. Not really. I nodded. Then don't. He let out a slow breath, then turned to me. His eyes were sharp, steady. She lied to you. She lied to me. I don't see why I should listen to anything she's got to say now. I studied him, feeling something settle in my chest. He wasn't just saying it to be tough. He meant it. He'd made up his own mind. You're a good man, Tyler, I said, pushing off the stall. Let's get to work. We spent the next few hours fixing a busted fence on the east side of the property. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning chill. We worked in silence, the way men do when there's nothing left to say. By noon, I was back at the house, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a stack of paperwork from Roman Turner. Divorce was a process, even when you had all the leverage. I signed what needed signing, then picked up my phone and made a call. Roman answered on the second ring. Jameson. It's done, I said. File it. Already in motion, he said. She doesn't have much of a case. You're keeping the farm, the assets, everything tied to the business. She gets what's fair, nothing more. Good. Roman hesitated. She's gonna try to fight this, you know. Probably come at you with some sob story. Say she was lonely. Say it was a mistake. I don't care what she says. He exhaled. All right. I'll handle it. I hung up, set the phone down, and looked out the window. The land stretched out before me, steady, solid, the only thing in my life that hadn't betrayed me. I had what I needed. My boy. My farm. My name. That night, I drove into town for a drink. The Cedar Creek Tavern was quiet. Mostly the regulars, men like me, men who worked the land, who built things with their hands. I ordered a whiskey, neat, and leaned against the bar, taking in the hum of conversation, the scrape of boots against wood. Reed slid onto the stool next to me, tipping his hat back. Well, he said, you sure know how to put on a show. I took a sip of whiskey. Had to be done. He smirked. Damn right it did. You should have seen Zachary slinking out of town this morning. Looked like a whip dog. I let that sit for a second, then nodded. Good. Reed studied me, serious now. So what's next? I rolled the glass between my fingers, watching the way the light caught the amber liquid. Same as always. Work the land. Take care of my boy. Keep moving forward. He nodded, like he'd expected that answer. You ever think about, he gestured vaguely. You know. Starting over. I let out a slow breath. Not yet. He didn't push. Just lifted his beer in a silent toast. Well, here's to clean slates. I clinked my glass against his, took another sip, and let the warmth settle in my chest. The past was done. Now, it was just me and the road ahead. A month passed. The divorce papers were signed and filed. Scarlett had tried to argue for more, but she had no ground to stand on. The farm, the land, the house, everything tied to it was mine. Always had been. She packed up and left town, moving to Austin, last I heard. Didn't say goodbye. Didn't try to fight for Tyler. That told me everything I needed to know. I didn't lose a damn thing. If anything, I felt lighter. Work kept moving. The farm didn't slow down just because my marriage had ended. Tyler and I put in the hours, the sweat, the labor, and by the time the next cattle shipment went out, profits were steady. I made a few changes, expanded sales to a couple new buyers out in Waco, upgraded some of the equipment I'd been putting off replacing. Life had a way of sorting itself out when you put your head down and handle business. One afternoon, I was fixing a busted tractor belt when a familiar truck rolled up the drive. Maya Larson. She owned the ranch a few miles over, had been running it on her own since her husband passed a few years back. Hardworking woman. Didn't waste words. She stepped out, dusting off her jeans. Heard you might be selling those hay bales from the south field. I wiped the grease off my hands and nodded. Depends. You looking to buy? Depends. You looking to sell? I smirked. She always did have a way of cutting through the nonsense. Go take a look. See if they meet your standards. She nodded, heading toward the field. I followed, watching her eye the bales, pressing her boot against the stacks, checking for moisture. She knew her stuff. They're good, she said finally. I'll take 20, if the price is right. I gave her a number. She countered. We settled somewhere in the middle. Business was business. She glanced at me as we walked back. So, you done dealing with all that mess? I knew what she meant. Half the town had heard about the festival by now. It's handled. She nodded like she approved. Good. You ever need an extra hand with anything, let me know. I didn't read too much into it, but as she drove off, I stood there a minute longer than I needed to, watching the dust settle behind her tires. That night, Tyler and I sat out on the porch, the air thick with the scent of rain coming in. He was sharpening a blade again, the slow, methodical scrape of metal against stone filling the silence. You regret anything? He asked suddenly. I took a sip of my beer, watching the sky darken. No. He nodded, kept sharpening. Good. The kid didn't talk much about it, but I knew he'd been watching, learning. He'd seen the way I handled things, the way I didn't let emotion make me weak, the way I set things straight without begging or breaking. One day, when it was his turn to be tested, he'd remember. I leaned back in my chair, stretching out my legs. What about you? He thought for a second, then shook his head. She made her choice. That was all that needed saying. The farm would go on, the land would keep producing, and life would keep moving. Nothing about that had changed. Maybe one day I'd think about starting over, but I wasn't in a hurry. The past was behind me, and for the first time in a long time, the future looked just fine. The year passed quicker than I expected. The divorce was finalized without much of a fight. Scarlett didn't show up to the last hearing, had her lawyer sign off on everything. No messages, no phone calls. She was gone, and that suited me just fine. Zachary Lambert's shop shut down a few months later. Word had spread fast, and no decent man in Cedar Creek wanted to give business to a snake. He left town without much noise, tail tucked between his legs. Tyler stayed on, working the farm alongside me. He had options, college, other jobs, but he didn't seem in a rush to leave. He liked the work, liked knowing exactly where his effort went at the end of the day. One evening, we sat on the porch watching the sun dip behind the fields. "You ever think about selling?" he asked, stretching his legs out. I let out a breath, looking out at the land, the fences we'd built, the house I'd patched up more times than I could count. "Not a damn chance." He nodded like he expected that. Didn't think so. The farm was in better shape than ever. Business was good. I hired on a couple more hands, bought new equipment, expanded the cattle operation. More work, but the right kind. The kind that paid off. I didn't lose sleep over Scarlett, didn't waste a second wondering if she regretted anything. A woman like that didn't regret. She just moved on to the next mistake. That wasn't my problem. Maya stopped by more often. Sometimes for business, sometimes just to shoot the breeze. One afternoon, she swung by to pick up feed and ended up staying for coffee. We sat outside, the late summer heat settling into the porch wood. "You ever slow down?" she asked, tilting her cup toward me. I smirked, taking a sip. Wouldn't know what to do with myself if I did. She laughed, shaking her head. Figured as much. We didn't make a thing out of it. No dramatic conversations, no awkward pauses. Just two people who understood each other, who liked the same kind of quiet. She was tough, no nonsense, ran her ranch like a damn general. I respected that. A few weeks later, she showed up after a storm, helping me clear a fallen tree off the fence line. No hesitation, no waiting around for an invite. Just picked up an axe and got to work. By the time we were done, we sat on the tailgate of my truck, catching our breath. She wiped her forehead with the back of her hand. "If I didn't know any better, I'd think you were trying to impress me." I grinned, rolling my shoulders. "If I was, I wouldn't have let you outwork me." She chuckled, shaking her head. "Guess I'll have to try harder next time." Tyler watched all this without saying much, but I caught him smirking now and then. Kid was sharp. One evening, we were fixing a water trough when he set his wrench down and stretched his arms. "So you and Maya?" I shot him a look. "What about me and Maya?" He held up his hands, grinning. "Nothing. Just a skinned." I rolled my eyes, shaking my head. Get back to work. Life didn't change much, and that was the best part. The land stayed steady, the farm thrived, and the people who mattered stuck around. Everything else, gone. The last time I saw Scarlett was in town, a few months later. She looked different, thinner, tired, like life had worn her down a little. She spotted me across the parking lot, hesitated, then walked over. "Hey, Jameson." I nodded, kept my hands in my pockets. "Scarlett." She shifted on her feet, looking anywhere but at me. I heard Tyler's doing well." "He is." Silence stretched between us. She sighed. "I didn't mean for things to." I held up a hand, stopping her right there. "Don't." Her mouth pressed into a thin line. She nodded once, then stepped back. "Take care, Jameson." I didn't say it back, just watched her walk off, disappearing into a car that wasn't hers. That was it. That was all the closure I needed. A year after everything, the farm had its best season yet. I stood on the porch one evening, watching the sky burn orange over the fields. Tyler was out checking the fence line. Maya was leaning against my truck, talking to Reed about cattle feed. The smell of fresh-cut hay filled the air. I took a slow breath, letting it settle in my chest. Everything was right where it should be.